What I say is the following, that for the last 500 years, we'll just limit it to that, there are two opposing ways of looking at mankind and two opposing ways of organizing the affairs of the people. One way is most strongly exemplified by the British Empire. They do things in one way. The other way is the American Revolution and the Union side in the Civil War. Everything that you have been taught in recent times is to try to avoid looking at the world that way. The British Empire, at the time of the American Revolution, what kind of business were they in? What did they do? What was their economic activity of the British Empire?
Trade.
They were trade. They talked about trade. They had ships that would bring things from one place to another. They were also in the insurance business. What did they sell? Well, one thing that they sold was slaves, black slaves. They had a company called the Royal African Company. It was founded by the Duke of York, and they used to brand the slaves D.Y. They also got into opium sales, and that became bigger later on. But they were doing that already at the time of the American Revolution. They would also corner the market in certain commodities and take them from somebody cheap and sell them at a higher price somewhere else by somehow rigging something the best that they could. And that was their whole mode of operations. In other words, forms of criminal activities. Now, sometimes today, you'll get some crackpot who will say, you can't judge people in those days by today's standards. Why not? Today's standards are a lot worse than they were then. What are you talking about? These guys run the place now more than they did then. At least then we had to fight against that. Because in those days they were looked on as criminal. Nobody ever thought the slave trade was a decent thing to do. It was a criminal activity. Everybody knew that. That was one side. Now, I want this to be crystal clear so there's no way to escape from it, okay? There was a revolution against that in the colonies. Who were the leaders of that revolution? Well, according to the communists, according to Jefferson Davis, and according to the British, all three of whom say exactly the same thing, the leaders of the American Revolution were a bunch of slave owners and slave traders. Right? All of the Southern secessionists, the Communist Party, and the British Empire all say exactly the same thing. And it's picked up on a lot of popular radio stations and so forth, and a lot of rap artists and so forth. The American Revolution was led by slave owners and slave traders. Okay. Supposing that's not true, then what? Then you've got a real bad problem on your hands, don't you? You've got a real bad problem. You might have to pay attention to history. It might mean something to you, instead of just being a big ripoff. Oh, well, we don't have to learn anything about history because it's just a big ripoff. The world is a big ripoff. Don't you know Satan runs the world? No, Satan doesn't run the world. God runs the world.
Who's God? Which God?
The God that created the world. I don't know what his proper name is, but I know that there's a God who created this world.
Well, you believe in magic, huh?
All right, now, there was an alternative to the British Empire, and it goes all the way back to the Renaissance. Three principal leaders of the American Revolution: George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, and Alexander Hamilton. Take the revolution from the time of the formation of the organization, led by Franklin, all the way through the Constitution, principally led by Hamilton. Start with George Washington. George Washington, and these are the three principal leaders of the organization of our country at the beginning. The war against England and the creation of a national government. Start with George Washington, the most important Southern politician we've ever had. Right? Don't tell me about Jefferson Davis. George Washington is the most important Southern politician. Anybody who says the Confederacy represents the South is coming from the standpoint of British Freemasonry. George Washington, you couldn't get more Southern. He inherited a slave plantation, right? Born in the South, born in Virginia. What did he dedicate himself to do? To undermine and replace a worldwide British system of slavery. The whole world was a slave system in the British Empire way of thinking. What was his idea? He said, instead of having the cheapest possible labor and the cheapest possible raw materials that we grab from somewhere and sell somewhere else, and that's what we were supposed to do according to Adam Smith, what George Washington said is, let us have canals. He personally did the route for the Erie Canal. He led the fight for a canal out to the Ohio. He said, let us grow corn and wheat. Let us have fisheries. Let us have roads. Let us build industry. And let us have a war against the British Empire, because we've got to have a modern society. His farewell address was an address against listening to intriguers who would want to have secession. Okay, that's George Washington. Benjamin Franklin and Alexander Hamilton, the two of them, were the originators of the Anti-Slavery Society in the United States. Alexander Hamilton, born in the West Indies, the son of unmarried parents, not an aristocrat, possibly of black ancestry, came to America and had a program for opposing the British world slave system. Because he hated slavery. He saw it all around him in the Caribbean. And he did something that the British never forgave him for, never forgave America for. He set up a national bank of our country. A bank of the Republic. The Bank of the United States, which he personally controlled as Treasury Secretary for Washington. And what's the idea of that? Well, if there are international bankers that charge 10, 20% interest, no problem. You have your own bank that charges 3% and gets loans out to people who want to build industry and farming. And what's the purpose of industry, according to Alexander Hamilton? And this gets back, again, to the fight with these guys. What's the purpose of having industry and industrial development and technological progress? As he defined it in his report on manufactures, he said, the purpose of having this industrial development is to have the human mind improved. Because if we live in a natural society, that is a peasant society, where people keep their place in nature and their place vis-a-vis the aristocrats, then each man is an idiot. Each man is maintained as an idiot by his superiors. So therefore, how do you change that? By having variegated, various, thriving, constantly new industries of a powerful industrial type with hundreds and thousands and millions of companies and private farms. And you do that in a country that gets power from that, and you have many countries that have power. And any country can do that and have their own national bank. And therefore not have international bankers dictating to that country. That's the basis for nationalism of a positive type. Now, if anybody says that these people were the slave party or slave owners, and that defines them, not only is it a lie, but it's coming from the British, who were the inventors, at least in our modern times, of the slave system.